I also think there's a future that this could be like one of the worst 10 years ever. I have to be honest that like there's the potential for catastrophic risk, viruses being created in the lab and released, AIs taking over social media and manipulating people, from vast centralization of power. We already see AI-powered drones like hunting down people. These are like so tragic. They're dystopians, these drones like chasing a soldier. It's like, oh my God. And it doesn't matter which side of the war I'm on. I kind of sympathize with the human being chased by the drone. The thing I would say is that we have a tremendous amount of agency. And so we should think less about what will happen to us and what AI will do, and more about what we want to use AI for.
That's Eric Brynjolfsson, a Stanford professor who has spent 30 years measuring exactly what technology does to jobs. When a Stanford economist who predicted this says millions of jobs are already gone and the worst is coming faster than anyone admits, I pay attention, and honestly, I don't think we're ready for what he's describing. Let's listen to the full conversation.
You just had this lab paper called Canaries in the Coal Mine that shows that AI has already wiped out 16% of entry-level jobs, but only for people under 25. Can we talk about that?
Sure. It's not just under people under 25. It's also specifically in the most exposed occupations. You can rank all the occupations in the economy by whether AI can affect them. So we did that, and we looked at the most exposed occupations, and that's the number you just quoted, about 16% less employment for young people up to age 25. So I don't want to sugarcoat it. The core folks who are using AI to automate their jobs in places like coding and call centers that are highly exposed, there was double-digit declines in employment.
What are these most exposed fields?
So coding is obviously dead center. Call centers, parts of sales, marketing. It's actually, we find that the most useful way to do it is look at tasks as opposed to entire occupations. So every job is a bundle of tasks. Like, Jeff Hinton, the famous deep learning researcher, talked about radiologists being replaced.
Yeah.
But, radiologists actually do 26 distinct tasks we've recorded.
For those most endangered fields, how much is AI doing in terms of tasks? Is it like close to 80% or?
Well, that's the other thing. Within tasks, it's varying quite a bit as well. So in coding, it's happened so fast with agents. And I teach my course at Stanford, even last year, the students all did projects and they presented at the end of the class, typically like PowerPoint presentations. This year, every single student, every single project, they have to have running code, because whether or not they were a coder before or not, everybody's a coder now. Everybody's a coder now. That's a good message for your listeners. If you use tools like Replit or Cursor or Cloud Code, you can just have an idea, you describe it, and Cloud Code or Replit will help create it. So they all presented, actually just Friday, we had our final presentations. 20 teams presented it. So that's something where it's doing a lot. Call centers, I did a paper on call centers. And when I wrote that a couple of years ago with Lindsay Raymond and Danielle Lee, we found that the LLMs were mainly helping the human agents answer questions, and the human always did the actual discussion with the person calling in. Now we're working with the same company, and a big percentage of the questions are being directly answered by the agent, by the AI agent, I should say.
16% of entry-level jobs already gone for people under 25, and he says it gets worse every single month. Not next year, not in 5 years right now. I look at the coding and call center numbers and wonder what exactly a 22-year-old is supposed to do when the ground floor just disappears beneath them. Now listen to this.
When a person becomes more productive and AI does parts of their job, that actually leads companies to hire more of them. And if I can get a little bit wonky, I'm going to explain a little economics here.
Please, yeah.
So the way I think of it is through the lens of what we call demand curves, which is a downward sloping curve. So if you compare price on the vertical axis and quantity on the horizontal axis, then lower prices lead to more quantity. We all kind of have intuition that if you cut the price, more people can buy.
Yeah.
But the steepness varies a lot, and it matters a lot. If it's very, very steep, then a lower price leads to only a small increase in quantity, so you end up earning less money. Roughly half the economy is in categories where you have falling spending as the price goes down. But the more interesting part is the half of the economy where lower prices lead to more spending. And that's a really important message, I think, is that as AI makes things more efficient, it's definitely destroying jobs and eliminating income in some places, but it's also creating opportunities in lots of other ones. I mentioned some of the changes in employment, a little bit in productivity, but it's really not a dramatic change yet. We're watching it carefully to see whether or not it will start taking off more. I mean, there's a real contrast. We also created something called the AI Index, the Stanford AI Index, which tracks some of the raw capabilities, like, all these benchmark tests, like how well can it do on a math test or read a document. And on those, it's doing really well.
So when you say it is not happening, does that mean that companies use it in a way that creates, I don't know, AI slop or things they can't use? Yes. Why is it even happening?
So part of it is they're creating AI slop, or they're using it in things that aren't that important. I was at one company, they did a big hackathon where everybody was making stuff and they were so excited. The winning one was this person who used LLMs to make lunch menus. And I was like, oh, that's kind of fun, but is that really like the core value of your company, to have better lunch menus? So they need to connect it to real business problems, and it takes a while to figure out what those opportunities are and then execute well. Now, to be fair, this happens every time there's a powerful new technology. Like I studied in my PhD work, I studied how electricity rolled out 100 years ago in American factories. Believe it or not, it took about 30 years between when they first introduced electric motors in American factories and when you saw significant productivity gains. People like Paul David looked at the production records. Now, 30 years, that's insane.
That's a lot. Yeah.
That's insane, but that's true. That's what the data show.
How long will it take us with AI?
It's going to be a lot faster.
Okay.
But it's not going to be overnight.
Half the economy will see falling spending and lost jobs, he says that flat out. And the part that bothers me is that the raw capability of these systems is skyrocketing while the real economic destruction hasn't even properly hit yet. Electricity took 30 years to reshape factories, but he thinks this time we're looking at 3 to 5. That's not a lot of time to figure out what to do with millions of displaced people. Let's continue.
A lot of people have a dream of going to Stanford, but maybe they're 12 years old. I had this dream when I was a kid. Do you think it will still be a valid dream in 10 years from what you're seeing?
I hope so.
Yeah,
I have a job there.
Yeah. From what you're seeing, how relevant is education to what's happening?
It's changing. Honestly, it's changing quite a bit. And I think, the kinds of courses where they're just kind of teaching a cookbook, this is how you invert a matrix, this is the step-by-step process for doing whatever.
To name some jobs, good paying jobs, would you tell people to spend years becoming them, or no? Junior software engineer that pays $95K a year right now.
No, unfortunately, that's one that's very much in the bullseye of being replaced. I mean, especially because you said the junior part. We see that in the data, they're disappearing.
Where are they going? When they're disappearing, what happens to them?
You mean the jobs or the people?
People.
They need to find something else to do. So one of the things they do is they learn to do more of the senior stuff. So I was working with Infosys, one of the big companies, and they said they're actually hiring as many junior people as before. But instead of having them do the sort of routine work that the LLMs and the agents can do, they're actually having them spend a lot more time training and learning the big picture project management stuff. So, it's a different mindset. Most companies, to be frank, are not that forward looking, and I think they're going to be hurt because, they had like this pyramid. Most companies have this pyramid, like, a law firm, software engineering. We got a bunch of junior people, and then some of them work their way up and become middle management and senior. Now, if you get rid of the base of the pyramid, it becomes like a diamond.
The question that a lot of people are having these days, how do I become senior if there is no position where I can be a junior for a few months at least?
I'll tell you something. It's a societal problem. It's a bit of a prisoner's dilemma, I think, or a coordination problem, economists call it, because for every company individually, maybe it's privately okay to just like save the cost, not hire the junior people. But as a society, you need to have those people have jobs and learn the skills. So we need to, I'm glad Infosys is doing it on their own, but we also need to come up with some societal solutions. We see a lot of LMs being able to do that. Now, to be fair, in each of these jobs, there's bits and pieces of them that are more immune, some of the project management, the taste part, but the core part of the job is kind of in the bullseye.
Okay. Paralegal. 68.
Oh my God, it's even worse. What
a list.
Look, I don't want to sugarcoat it. My job's not here to paint a happy story. There are a bunch of jobs, millions of jobs that are going to disappear.
How soon?
It's already happening in our Canaries data.
Junior software engineer, no more marketing manager, no paralegal. Even worse, these aren't fringe roles, these are the stable middle-class jobs that people use to build entire lives around. The question of how you become senior when the junior rungs get sawed off is one nobody has a good answer for. Now listen.
I'm super worried about this. You heard me earlier say that I'm optimistic about growth, and I think we're going to have higher productivity growth, a lot more wealth creation. I'm concerned that that's going to be very concentrated, more concentrated than it is right now. It's not an inevitability. We have choices going forward. And one of the things I want people to think about is what kind of values we have and what kind of future we want to create. I would like to see a world where we not only have prosperity, but shared prosperity. But one scenario that worries me is AI will automate a lot of work, a lot of jobs, and people will be entrepreneurial. But if it becomes too focused in just a few companies or one big government-owned entity, then all the wealth and power gets concentrated.
Mm-hmm. What can someone like me do? Or someone who doesn't have a podcast, like how can they make sure they participate? Buy stocks?
Well, literally one of the reasons I created...
companies?
No, I think, stocks is a bit, but I think what you really need to do is create the value. Mm-hmm. And that's why I created the master class. That's what I teach in my Stanford class, is how can you use AI to create new goods and services? Not to be a rule follower who, just does stuff because you're going to be replaced by a machine if you do that. But how can you be one of those people who asks the right questions? How can you use AI to create new products and services? And in a world where there's more entrepreneurship and value creation, then I think we continue to have widely dispersed economic power. But if everybody's just following instructions, then we're going to have that concentration of wealth. So that's the number one thing. You don't want to have all the wealth and power too concentrated. It's not in anyone's interest, including the billionaires. People will come after them with pitchforks. and so we want to have a world where everyone can participate. And in the end, people create more value. I've visited some of these developing countries or parts of Latin America where wealthy people live in gated communities with these walls, and they have we don't want that. Machine guns, and they have their own schools, their own doctors, and private police forces. No, it's not fun for anybody. I had a friend, she lived in Brazil, and she said she and all of her rich friends were in prison. I said, what do you mean you're not in prison? She said, no, we're in prison of our own creation. I sit behind these walls, and when I go out, I have guards on either side of me because it's just like the society is not safe for me.
He's basically describing a world where all the wealth pools into a few hands while everyone else gets locked out. And he mentions pitchforks not as a metaphor, but as a real historical pattern. That's not a future, that's already happening in places. And he's saying AI could supercharge it everywhere. Now hear this.
I also think there's a future that this could be like one of the worst 10 years ever. I have to be honest that there's the potential for catastrophic risk, viruses being created in the lab and released, AIs taking over social media and manipulating people, from vast centralization of power. We already see AI-powered drones hunting down people. These are so tragic. They're dystopians, these drones chasing a soldier. Mm-hmm. It's oh my God. And doesn't matter which side of the war I'm on, I kind of sympathize with the human being chased by the drone. So all those things are also possible. The thing I would say is that we have a tremendous amount of agency. And so we should think less about what will happen to us and what AI will do, and more about what we want to use AI for. AI is a tool, and a message I keep hammering over and over is that when tools become more powerful, that means by definition we have more agency, we have more power to change the world. So we need to really think, be philosophers and think about our values. What kind of world do we want to shape? And don't take it for granted that AI is just going to steer us one way or the other. We still have the agency right now, and we should be steering that technology towards one of those more beneficial futures and being damn careful to avoid those catastrophic futures. I totally think they're possible. Yeah. The doomers are not wrong, that there's a real risk there. They are wrong if they think those are inevitable, because we'll have choices. And so I've been working with the labs and with politicians to do what we can to shape us towards that future of shared prosperity.
Fingers crossed we're going to land on the positive scenario. Yeah. I keep telling my daughters that they won't have as many problems as I have. I mean,
they'll have different ones.
They will have different ones, but the ones that I'm having, they're probably not going to have them.
He says the next decade could be the best in human history or the worst. The same technology that might cure most diseases could also unleash engineered viruses and autonomous drones hunting people down. And the really terrifying part is that nobody, not the labs, not the governments, not the economists, knows which path we end up on. We are all just hoping we land right. If that thought keeps you up at night, subscribe, because I'm going to keep following exactly where this is heading.